For centuries, we've been asking the wrong question. How do we go faster? That question assumes speed is the enemy. It isn't. The universe never said you couldn't arrive somewhere faster than light. It only said you cannot move through space locally faster than light. Those are not the same thing. Imagine an ant crawling across a rubber sheet. Its speed is limited. But stretch the sheet, fold it, compress it, and the ant arrives without ever breaking its speed limit. The ant didn't cheat. The geometry changed. Physics is not offended by shortcuts. It's offended by contradictions. Now, here's the unsettling part. When scientists stopped obsessing over engines and started questioning distance itself, something strange happened. The equations didn't scream impossible. They whispered, be careful. Because space-time is not a rigid stage. It's a participant. Under extreme conditions, space can expand, contract, and rearrange itself. Not metaphorically, mathematically. And if space itself moves, then objects inside it are not violating any speed limit at all. This is where people panic and shout science fiction. But physics doesn't care what feels comfortable. It cares about consistency. The real obstacle isn't speed, it's causality. If information arrives before it's sent, logic collapses, effects precede causes, reality eats itself. Nature absolutely refuses that, so the challenge becomes brutally precise. Can space-time be engineered in a way that preserves causality while collapsing distance? That's not fantasy, that's a question, and questions are dangerous, because once you write them down honestly, without ego, the math either kills the idea or sharpens it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most faster-than-light concepts fail not because they're bold, but because they're sloppy. They ignore energy cost, they ignore quantum instability, they ignore the fact that the universe always sends you a bill. But a few ideas survive longer than expected, not because they promise miracles, but because they respect the rules while bending the board. And that's the lesson. Scientific progress doesn't come from shouting impossible or screaming breakthrough. It comes from asking questions so precise that nature is forced to answer honestly. 10 times faster than light? That phrase is meaningless. Unless you understand what is moving, what is fixed, and what you're willing to pay, the future won't belong to faster engines. It will belong to better questions, and the universe, reluctantly, always responds. Speed versus distance is the wrong question, and it always has been. The moment we ask how fast something can move, we trap ourselves inside a human intuition that the universe never promised to respect. We imagine motion as a race across a fixed stage with speed limits painted onto the floor like traffic signs. But nature does not operate on intuition. It operates on structure. And the structure of reality makes speed far less interesting than geometry. The speed of light is not a wall in space. It is a rule about local behavior. It tells us how fast cause can chase effect when nothing else is changing. That's all. It does not say space itself must sit still. It does not say distance is sacred. It simply says that if you are here and something happens there, information connecting the two must obey a limit if space between them remains unchanged. And that assumption, that distance is fixed, is where thinking collapses. Space is not an empty container. It stretches, it contracts, it bends under energy and pressure. We know this not from speculation, but from measurement. Galaxies are not flying away from each other like debris from an explosion. Space itself is expanding between them. No galaxy is locally breaking the light barrier, yet distances grow faster than light can cross them. That is not an exception. That is a clue. If space can expand, it can also be manipulated in print. IPO. The equations do not forbid it. They warn us about cost, instability, and consequences, but they do not prohibit rearrangement, which means the obsession with speed misses the deeper lever available to reality, changing the distance instead of outrunning it. This distinction matters because physics is conservative. It hates violations. It tolerates cleverness. When you try to move faster than light through space, you violate causality. Effects outrun causes. Paradoxes appear. The universe slams the door. But when you ask whether space itself can be reshaped so that 2 points become neighbors, the universe does not scream. It hesitates. And hesitation in physics is an invitation to investigate. Consider what distance actually is. It is not a physical object. You cannot touch a meter. You infer it from signals traveling back and forth. Distance is bookkeeping. And like all bookkeeping systems, it depends on assumptions. Change the assumptions, and the numbers change without anything locally misbehaving. This is why the most radical ideas never start with engines. They start with geometry. They ask whether the path itself can be altered so that the journey becomes trivial. If you fold a map, two distant cities become adjacent without either one moving. The ink does not travel faster. The paper changes shape. People object emotionally to this because it feels like cheating, but physics does not care about fairness. It cares about consistency. And there is nothing inconsistent about a universe where the stage participates in the play. Now, This is where intellectual honesty becomes non-negotiable. Reshaping space is not free. Energy requirements appear, exotic conditions arise. Instabilities threaten to tear the structure apart. Nature always demands payment. Anyone who ignores the bill is selling fantasy, not science. But demanding payment is not the same as forbidding the transaction. The mistake most people make is assuming that because something is difficult, it is impossible. That is not how nature operates. Nature draws hard lines only where logic breaks. Faster than light motion through space breaks logic. Changing the space itself challenges engineering, not causality. And that difference is everything. Once you understand this, the phrase 10 times faster than light becomes meaningless. Faster than light relative to what? Through which geometry, measured by which clocks? The universe does not care about slogans. It cares about definitions. The real question is not how fast we can go, but how cleverly we can define the path. Every major advance in physics came from abandoning the obvious question and replacing it with a sharper one. Not how heavy is it, but how does it fall? Not what force pushes planets, but what shape does mass carve into space? Progress happens when we stop asking questions that feel natural and start asking questions that feel uncomfortable. Speed versus distance feels natural. Geometry versus causality feels uncomfortable. That's why it matters. If the future ever produces a way to cross cosmic distances and human timescales, it will not look like a rocket screaming through space at impossible speed. It will look quiet, subtle, almost boring. Nothing locally breaks the rules. Nothing outruns light in its neighborhood. And yet somehow two places that were once impossibly far apart simply stop being so. That outcome would not represent a rebellion against physics. It would represent obedience, taken to its logical extreme. And the only people who will recognize it when it happens are those who learned early that speed was never the point. Nature allows shortcuts, not cheating, and the difference between those two ideas is where most bad science is born. Cheating is trying to win while pretending the rules don't exist. Shortcuts are what happen when you understand the rules so well that you stop fighting them and start using them. The universe has never rewarded defiance. Rewards comprehension. Every physical law we know behaves this way. You can't build a machine that creates energy from nothing, but you can build one that wastes almost none. You can't signal information faster than light in a local frame, but you can arrange circumstances where distance itself becomes irrelevant. Nature isn't moral. It doesn't punish ambition. It punishes contradictions. If your idea collapses logic, it dies instantly. If it preserves consistency, it's allowed to struggle. This is why the word impossible is usually a confession of intellectual laziness. Most things declared impossible were simply attempted in the dumbest way first. Flying was impossible until lift was understood. Spaceflight was impossible until weight was treated as a force to escape rather than a condition to endure. In every case, progress came not from overpowering nature, but from aligning with it. Nature does not respond to brute force. It responds to structure. When people imagine faster than light travel, they imagine cheating. A ship blasting through space, ignoring limits, smashing through barriers like a cartoon. That picture fails instantly because it violates causality. Effects arrive before causes. The universe doesn't negotiate on that point. Reality becomes inconsistent, and inconsistency is the one thing physics absolutely refuses to tolerate. But when the same idea is reframed as a shortcut, something changes. A shortcut does not break the rules, it exploits their deeper implications. It asks whether the constraint applies to what we think it applies to. It asks whether we misunderstood the playing field. Consider how rivers behave. Water does not move uphill. That rule is strict. Yet canals exist. Locks exist. Entire shipping systems operate without violating gravity. The water never cheats. The terrain is arranged so that downhill exists where you need it. The rule remains intact. The outcome changes. Physics works the same way. If you try to overpower a law, it crushes you. If you understand the law, you find degrees of freedom you didn't know were there. This is why thought experiments matter. Not because they predict gadgets, but because they expose where the rules are actually enforced. When you imagine an extreme scenario and follow it carefully, the universe tells you exactly where it will tolerate creativity and where it will not. It doesn't shout. It constrains. Shortcuts always come with costs. Anyone who claims otherwise is lying or ignorant. Nature allows efficiency, not charity. If you want to compress distance, energy appears in the equations. If you want to stabilize an exotic configuration, quantum effects push back. Every shortcut comes with trade-offs that must be paid continuously, not once. But payment is not prohibition. The failure of most speculative ideas is not that they are bold. It's that they ignore the bill. They focus on the destination and forget the maintenance. Nature is fine with clever constructions, but it will not babysit them. If a structure is unstable, it collapses. If an idea requires infinite energy, it is quietly rejected. That's not cruelty. That's accounting. The universe is an accountant with perfect books. You can move numbers around, but the totals must match. If they don't, the proposal is denied. This is the deeper reason shortcuts are allowed. They preserve the balance sheet. Cheating doesn't. A shortcut rearranges terms without changing the sum. Cheating tries to erase terms and hopes no one notices. When people say nature wouldn't allow that, what they usually mean is, I don't see how the cost could be paid. That's an honest concern, but it is not a proof. The correct response is not dismissal, but calculation. Write it down, follow it through, see where it fails. If it collapses, good. You learn something real. Intellectual discipline is the difference between fantasy and progress. You don't get points for imagination alone. You get points for I. Imagination that survives contact with equations. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Nature has already shown us shortcuts we once thought absurd. Time dilation, length contraction, curved space-time, quantum tunneling. None of these feel fair. All of them are real. Each one preserves the rules while violating expectation. Nature does not owe us intuitive answers. It owes us consistent ones. So when an idea appears that seems to slip past a limit without breaking it, the correct reaction is not excitement or rejection. It is suspicion followed by work. The universe is subtle, but it is not sloppy. If a shortcut exists, it will be narrow, expensive, and fragile. It will demand precision. It will punish arrogance, but it will exist if and only if it does not contradict itself. That is the line that separates science from storytelling. Not whether something sounds extreme, but whether it cheats. And nature, without exception, always allows shortcuts, right up until the moment you try to lie to it. The universe cares about consistency, not intuition, and that fact is responsible for nearly every moment in history when human confidence collided with reality and lost. Intuition is a survival tool, not a truth detector. It evolved to keep us alive at walking speeds, moderate temperatures, and familiar scales. The universe operates far outside those conditions, and it does not slow down or simplify itself to accommodate how things feel to us. When intuition fails, people don't usually abandon it. They defend it. They insist reality must be wrong because it doesn't behave the way their minds expect. That instinct has delayed progress more than ignorance ever has. Ignorance can be fixed. Attachment to intuition resists correction. Consistency, on the other hand, is non-negotiable. A universe that contradicts itself cannot exist long enough to be observed. Every law we discover is not a preference, but a requirement for logical survival. If causes did not precede effects, memory would be meaningless. If conservation laws failed randomly, prediction would collapse. The universe does not care whether its rules feel elegant or ugly. They must fit together without tearing. This is why nature often behaves in ways that appear absurd. Objects contract when they move faster. Time slows down depending on speed and gravity. Particles exist in superpositions until measured. None of this feels reasonable. All of it is internally consistent. The equations close, the predictions work. That is the only standard reality enforces. Human intuition, by contrast, is local and biased. It assumes space is flat because we evolved on a nearly flat patch. It assumes time flows uniformly because our nervous systems rely on regular rhythms. It assumes simultaneity is absolute because our experiences occur at low speeds and short distances. These assumptions feel obvious. They are also wrong. The danger arises when intuition is mistaken for evidence. When something doesn't make sense, what that usually means is that it doesn't match a mental model built for survival, not for cosmic accuracy. The universe does not negotiate with mental comfort. It continues behaving as it always has, indifferent to whether anyone understands it. This becomes critical when dealing with extreme ideas. The moment a proposal sounds strange, intuition demands rejection. But strangeness is not a flaw. Inconsistency is. An idea can feel outrageous and still be correct. It can feel reasonable and still be false. Only logical coherence decides. Consider how often intuition has failed spectacularly. People once believed heavier objects fall faster. They once believed time was absolute. They once believed space was an empty stage. These beliefs weren't stupid. They were intuitive. And they were wrong. They were replaced not because they offended common sense, but because they failed consistency tests when measured carefully. Nature does not punish imagination. It punishes contrariety. Science. If an idea allows paradoxes, infinite values, or logical loops, it dies immediately. If it preserves structure, even when it shocks common sense, it survives long enough to be explored. This is why mathematics is such a powerful filter. Mathematics does not care how you feel about a result. It only cares whether the statements agree with each other. When the math works, intuition must adapt. When the math breaks, imagination is discarded. This process is ruthless and fair. People often accuse advanced physics of being disconnected from reality because it contradicts everyday experience. This is backwards. Everyday experience is disconnected from reality at extreme scales. Physics does not become strange because scientists enjoy confusion. It becomes strange because reality is strange when examined honestly. Consistency is the invisible referee. It decides which ideas are allowed to exist and which are quietly erased. The universe will tolerate almost anything except logical failure. It will tolerate warped space, stretched time, particles appearing from fluctuations. What it will not tolerate is a story that cannot close its own loops. This is why faster-than-light claims collapse so often. Not because they feel impossible, but because they allow effects to outrun causes. Memory breaks. Information arrives before it is sent. The structure of reality tears. Intuition might accept it. Consistency will not. Understanding this changes how questions are asked. Instead of demanding that an idea make sense, the better demand is that it make itself whole. Does it preserve causality? Does it respect conservation? Does it remain stable under small disturbances? If the answers are yes, intuition becomes irrelevant. The history of progress is the history of intuition being dragged unwillingly behind consistency. Every time we discovered something real, it felt wrong first. Only later did it become obvious. That delay is not a flaw in science. It is a feature of being human. The universe is not obligated to be understandable at first glance. It is obligated only to be itself, and it is relentlessly consistent. Those who advance knowledge are not the ones with the strongest intuition. They are the ones willing to distrust it, test it, and abandon it the moment it conflicts with internal coherence. Reality does not reward those who feel correct. It rewards those who are consistent. Once that lesson is learned, confusion stops being a threat. It becomes a signal. When intuition protests loudly, it is often pointing directly at the edge of understanding. And beyond that edge, consistency waits. Indifferent, precise, and uncompromising. Information, causality, and energy are the real gatekeepers, and every grand idea that ignores even one of them collapses under its own ambition. These three are not suggestions or guidelines. They are the structural supports of reality. You can push against them, you can test their limits, but the moment you pretend they don't exist, the universe ends the conversation. Information comes first because it defines what can be known, compared, and remembered. Without information, events are meaningless. A universe where information can appear freely, vanish arbitrarily, or travel without constraint would be a universe where prediction is impossible and memory has no anchor. Every physical process, no matter how mechanical it looks, is also an information process. Signals propagate, states evolve, correlations form. If information behaves inconsistently, reality loses its ability to describe itself. This is why limits on information transfer are sacred. They are not arbitrary speed limits, they are safeguards against logical breakdown. If information could arrive before it was sent, cause and effect would reverse. Messages could erase their own origins. Histories would contradict themselves. The universe refuses this scenario not because it is uncomfortable, but because it is incoherent, consist. Tendency demands that information follow a strict order. Causality is the rule that enforces that order. Causes precede effects, not as a philosophical preference, but as a requirement for structure. Without causality, the concept of explanation collapses. You cannot explain an event if it can be influenced by outcomes that have not yet occurred. Science itself would be impossible in such a universe because experiments would not have stable relationships between setup and result. People often misunderstand causality as a simple arrow of time. It is much more than that. It is the framework that prevents paradoxes. It is the reason you cannot send warnings to your past self. Not because it sounds absurd, but because it would destroy the logical integrity of reality. A universe that allows self-contradicting histories cannot maintain stable laws. Energy is the enforcer. Information and causality define what is allowed. Energy decides what is affordable. Every change in physical state requires energy. Every structure must be supported against collapse. There are no free rearrangements of reality. If you want to bend space, stabilize a configuration, or maintain an exotic condition, energy appears in the equations like a bill that must be paid continuously. This is where many speculative ideas fail. They focus on possibility and ignore cost. They show that something might be allowed in principle, then quietly assume the universe will subsidize it. It will not. Nature demands accounting. If an idea requires infinite energy, it is not forbidden, it is irrelevant. Anything that cannot be paid for cannot be built. These three gatekeepers work together. You cannot satisfy one while violating the others. An idea that preserves energy but breaks causality is rejected. An idea that respects causality but allows uncontrolled information flow collapses. An idea that keeps information consistent but demands impossible energy never leaves the page. What makes these constraints powerful is that they are not negotiable, they are not cultural, they do not depend on technology, they are woven into the structure of physical law. Technology does not weaken them, it reveals them more clearly. This is why the universe often appears conservative. It is not resisting progress, it is preserving coherence. When something new emerges, it does so by threading a narrow path through these constraints, not by bulldozing them. The more extreme the outcome, the tighter the path. Understanding this reframes ambition. The goal is no longer to ask what we want to happen, but what can happen without tearing the fabric of logic. The most powerful ideas are not those that shout the loudest, but those that whisper, "I fit." Consider how often revolutionary discoveries initially looked trivial. They didn't promise miracles. They promised consistency under conditions no one had tested before. Only later did their implications explode. Nature rewards patience and precision, not spectacle. Information, causality, and energy do not kill imagination. They shape it. They force creativity into forms that can survive contact with reality. Anyone can imagine a universe where anything is possible. That requires no intelligence. The challenge is imagining a universe where everything possible must also make sense. This is why serious thinking feels restrictive at first. Constraints feel like obstacles until you realize they are guidance. They tell you where not to waste effort. They tell you which directions collapse into nonsense and which might, with enough work, remain standing. Every idea that endures does so because it satisfies these gatekeepers simultaneously. It keeps information orderly. It preserves cause and effect. It pays its energy costs honestly. That combination is rare, and it is why progress is slow. But when an idea passes all three, the universe does not resist it. It allows it quietly, indifferently, without applause. Reality does not celebrate breakthroughs. It simply remains consistent, and consistency is the highest permission it ever grants. The dangerous power of thought experiments is not that they imagine impossible things, but that they expose whether our understanding is real or cosmetic. A thought experiment is a test with nowhere to hide. There are no instruments to blame, no noise to excuse, no experimental error to rescue a bad idea. If your reasoning fails in your head, it will fail everywhere else too. This is why thought experiments terrify weak theories. They strip ideas down to their logical skeleton. You remove the engineering, the technology, the excuses, and ask a single unforgiving question. If the laws you claim to believe are true, what must follow? Not what you hope follows, not what feels reasonable. What must follow? Most people misunderstand thought experiments as imagination games. They are not. They are precision tools. They are scalpels, not paintbrushes. When used correctly, they cut directly into the assumptions you didn't know you were making. The danger comes from their honesty. In a real experiment, complexity can hide ignorance. In a thought experiment, complexity is a liability. Every unnecessary detail is stripped away until only structure remains. And structure is where contradictions live. If your idea allows a paradox, the thought experiment will find it immediately. If it violates causality, it will expose the violation without mercy. This is why so many dramatic ideas die on the page before they ever reach a laboratory. They sound impressive until you push them to their logical extreme. Then they collapse. Not because nature is cruel, but because logic is a thought experiment does not ask whether something can be built. It asks whether it can exist without tearing itself apart. That distinction matters. Engineering difficulties are temporary. Logical impossibilities are permanent. Technology advances, contradictions do not. This is also why thought experiments feel dangerous to intuition. They often lead to conclusions that feel absurd, even offensive. But feelings are irrelevant here. A good thought experiment doesn't care how strange the answer seems. It only cares whether the reasoning is airtight. When someone dismisses a conclusion by saying, "That doesn't make sense," what they usually mean is, "That doesn't match my mental habits." A thought experiment doesn't negotiate with habits. It forces you to follow the consequences of your own beliefs step by step until you either accept the result or abandon the belief. That process is uncomfortable. It should be. Comfort is a sign that nothing fundamental is being questioned. The most powerful thought experiments are simple, not because reality is simple, but because simplicity removes camouflage. When only a few assumptions are present, each one becomes visible. You can no longer pretend a hidden premise isn't doing the real work. This is where the danger sharpens. Once an assumption is exposed, you must answer for it. Why is it there? Is it necessary? Is it justified? Or is it just familiar? Entire frameworks have collapsed because of this process. Not because new data arrive, but because someone followed an old idea to its logical conclusion and realized it couldn't survive its own implications. No explosion, no drama, just inconsistency revealed. Thought experiments are especially lethal when applied to extreme cases. Push a theory to the edge of its domain and see whether it breaks cleanly or shatters. Does it remain coherent when quantities become very large, very small, very fast, or very dense? Or does it produce infinities, paradoxes, and undefined behavior? Nature does not tolerate undefined behavior. That is a human programming error, not a feature of reality. The danger is amplified because thought experiments are cheap. They cost nothing but discipline. Anyone can run them, and that makes them threatening to authority. You do not need permission, few, or equipment to discover a contradiction. You only need the courage to ask the wrong question and the honesty to accept the answer. This is why progress often comes from people who are not impressed by complexity. They are impressed by coherence. They do not ask whether an idea sounds sophisticated. They ask whether it survives its own logic. There is also a second danger, subtler and more personal. Thought experiments do not only test theories, they test thinkers. They reveal who is willing to follow reasoning to an uncomfortable place and who retreats the moment it threatens identity or reputation. The experiment doesn't care who you are. It treats every mind equally. That is why thought experiments feel ruthless. They offer no partial credit. Either the idea holds together or it doesn't. You cannot argue with the conclusion without arguing with your own premises. This is also why thought experiments are so often misunderstood after the fact. When a conclusion turns out to be correct, people rewrite history and pretend it was obvious. It never was. It was disturbing. It violated intuition. That is why it mattered. The true danger of thought experiments is not that they lead us astray. It is that they force us to confront how much of what we know is inherited habit rather than earned understanding. Used carelessly, they produce nonsense. Used rigorously, they expose nonsense. The difference is discipline. A thought experiment must be constrained by the same rules as reality. The moment you allow yourself to cheat, it becomes fiction, but when done properly, a thought experiment is one of the most powerful tools ever created. It allows the mind to explore territory before the world catches up. It does not predict gadgets. It tests consistency, and consistency is the one thing the universe never forgives you for getting wrong. That is why thought experiments are dangerous, not because they are imaginative, but because they are honest. The future belongs to those who ask the right question, not because answers are unimportant, but because answers expire while good questions compound. An answer solves a problem once. A question reshapes the way problems are seen forever. History doesn't move forward on certainty. It moves forward on better curiosity. Most people are trained to hunt answers. From childhood, success is measured by how quickly a correct response can be produced. But reality does not reward speed of response. It rewards depth of inquiry. When the question is shallow, even a perfect answer is useless. When the question is sharp, even an incomplete answer can change the world. The wrong question locks you into a dead end. It narrows possibility without you noticing. Ask how to make a horse run faster, and you will never invent an engine. Ask how to move without a horse, and an entire future opens. The limitation was not technology. It was the question. This is why revolutions rarely come from people with more data. They come from people who reframe the problem. They notice that everyone else is solving the same puzzle on the same board, and they quietly move the board itself. The universe responds differently to different questions. Ask how to break a law of nature, and the answer is always no. Ask why the law exists, and suddenly you are allowed to explore its boundaries. Nature does not explain itself to demands. It reveals itself to curiosity disciplined by respect. The right question has a specific feel. It is uncomfortable. It removes easy answers instead of inviting them. It exposes assumptions you didn't realize you were making. It often sounds simple, which is why it is so dangerous. Complexity hides ignorance. Simplicity reveals it. This is why experts are sometimes the last to see what matters. Expertise is built on mastering existing questions. When those questions become outdated, mastery becomes inertia. Progress requires the humility to ask something that sounds naive but cuts deep. Than sophistication ever did. The future is not built by people who shout conclusions. It is built by people who are willing to look ignorant in the short term. Asking the right question often feels like stepping backward. You abandon the safety of familiar problems and risk discovering that your previous work was aimed at the wrong target. That risk is real. Many resist it. They protect their answers because their identity is attached to them. But reality is indifferent to identity. It only responds to coherence. A powerful question does something subtle. It forces reality to answer honestly. Not immediately, not conveniently, but inevitably. Once the right question exists, the universe cannot avoid it. Experiments are designed differently. Models are rewritten. Entire fields shift direction, not because the answer was known, but because the question demanded it. The wrong question, by contrast, can keep brilliant people busy for generations with nothing to show for it. Effort is not the issue. Direction is. You can work endlessly and still go nowhere if the problem itself is misframed. This is why the future is never evenly distributed. It belongs disproportionately to those who see the problem differently early. They are not necessarily smarter. They are often just more willing to doubt the obvious. Asking the right question requires a rare combination of traits. Curiosity without discipline produces noise. Discipline without curiosity produces stagnation. The balance is fragile. Lose either, and progress stops. The right question also has timing. Ask it too early and no one understands why it matters. Ask it too late and someone else has already claimed the future. This is why recognition often lags behind impact. The question mattered long before the world noticed. What makes this unsettling is that there is no formula for the right question. It cannot be memorized or automated. It emerges from deep engagement and dissatisfaction. It appears when someone looks at accepted explanations and quietly thinks, "This doesn't feel complete." That moment is the birthplace of the future. The future does not reward those who are most confident. It rewards those who are most precise about their ignorance. Knowing exactly what you do not understand is more powerful than knowing 1,000 things that do not matter. Once the right question is asked, progress becomes almost inevitable. Not easy, not fast, but directed. Energy stops being wasted. Effort accumulates. Even failures contribute because they refine the question instead of obscuring it. Answers age. Technologies become obsolete. But a well-formed question can guide discovery across decades. It can survive changing tools, new data, and shifting paradigms because it is rooted in structure, not fashion. The future belongs to those who ask the right question because asking it is an act of alignment with reality. It signals that you are no longer trying to force the universe to give you what you want. You are trying to understand what it will allow. And once you do that, the universe becomes an unwilling collaborator. Not generous, not kind, but honest. And honesty in the long run always wins.
Not a small lie, not an exaggeration, a complete, total, devastating lie. And millions of students around the world are learning from books just like it. Right now, today, thinking they're getting educated, thinking they're learning science. They're not. They're being deceived. And they don't even know it. Sakta put the book down, so how do I know? Because Richard Feynman discovered this lie in 1952 in a classroom in Brazil. And what he found was so shocking, so disturbing, that it changed how he thought about education forever. And once you understand what he discovered, once you see what he saw, you'll never look at education the same way again. Direct address, today, I'm going to tell you that story. Feynman's shocking realization in a Brazilian classroom. And I'm going to show you why this discovery matters to you right now. Whether you're a student, a parent, a teacher, or just someone trying to learn anything in this world. Because the lie Feynman discovered, it's everywhere in schools, in universities, in online courses, in books, in the entire education system. And until you understand this lie, until you can recognize it and reject it, you'll keep struggling to learn. You'll keep feeling like you're supposed to understand but don't. You'll keep thinking the problem is you. It's not you. It's the lie. Walk across stage. Let me tell you the story. Because this story is one of the most important things Feynman ever discovered. Not about physics, about learning itself. It's 1952. Feynman accepts a visiting professorship at the Center for Physical Research in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He's going to teach physics to graduate students for 10 months. He's excited. New country, new culture. Smart students eager to learn. It should be amazing. As a posit, and at first it is. The students are attentive. They take detailed notes. They memorize everything he says. They can recite back to him perfectly. They ace the exams. They're model students, the kind every teacher dreams of having. Or slow down, but Feynman starts to notice something strange, something disturbing. He asks students questions that require applying the concepts he's taught. Not just reciting them, applying them, thinking with them, using them to solve new problems. And they can't do it. let that land. And they can recite the definition of polarization. But they can't explain what happens when light reflects off water. They can recite the formula for angular momentum. But they can't figure out what happens when a spinning wheel is tilted. They know all the words. They can pass all the tests. But they don't understand anything. If I share his confusion and Feynman is confused. How is this possible? These are smart students at a good university with qualified professors, learning from standard textbooks. How can they know so much and understand so little? So he starts investigating. He sits in on other classes. He looks at the textbooks. He talks to students. He talks to professors. Build tension, and he makes a discovery. A shocking discovery. A discovery so disturbing that he gives a passionate speech about it at the end of his time in Brazil. A speech that gets him in trouble with the education establishment. What did he discover? A had a direct statement. He discovered that the students weren't learning science. They were learning to pretend to learn science. And worse, nobody knew the difference. Not the students, not the professors, not the system. They had created an elaborate theater of education, where everyone played their roles. Teachers taught, students studied, exams were passed, degrees were awarded, but no actual learning was happening. Pausing. Let me show you exactly what he found, because when you see this, you'll recognize it. You'll see it in your own education, your children's education. Everywhere. Share the first discovery first. Feynman discovers that students are memorizing words without understanding their meaning. He picks up a physics textbook, standard textbook, used in universities across Brazil, and he reads a passage about friction. The book says, when a body slides on a surface, the coefficient of kinetic friction is less than the coefficient of static friction. Look up part, the students can recite this perfectly, word for word. They've memorized it. So Feynman asks, can you give me an example of this in real life? Silence. Okay, try this. You're pushing a heavy box across the floor. At first, it's hard to get it moving. But once it starts moving, it's easier to keep it moving. Why? Car pausa, still nothing. These students can recite the textbook definition about coefficients of friction, but they can't connect it to pushing a box. They can't see that the textbook is talking about something they've experienced 100 times. Ours make the point, they've memorized words. But the words have no meaning, no connection to reality, no connection to experience. The words are just sounds to be repeated on exams. That's the first part of the lie, teaching words instead of concepts. Move to second discovery. In second, Feynman discovers that students are learning definitions instead of developing understanding. He's in a class. The professor asks, what is Brewster's angle? A student immediately raises his hand, recites perfectly. Brewster's angle is the angle at which light with a particular polarization can pass through a transparent dielectric surface without any reflection. Let's show this is impressive, a perfect answer. Exactly what the textbook says. The professor is pleased. Other students are nodding. But Feynman interrupts. He asks the student, can you tell me, in your own words, what that means? The student looks confused. That's what Brewster's angle is. No, you told me the definition. But what does it mean? Can you explain it without using technical terms? Pause us, the student can't. He knows the definition perfectly. He can spell every word. He got the answer right on the test. But he has no idea what he's talking about. Fey make the connection. He's learned the definition. But not the thing the definition is defining. He's learned the label without learning what the label points to. And this is everywhere in education. Students learn definitions. They memorize them. They repeat them on tests. And everyone thinks they've learned, but they haven't. They've just memorized arrangements of words. That's the second part of the lie, teaching definitions instead of understanding. Feynman moved to third discovery. Feynman discovers that students are studying about science instead of doing science. He's watching a laboratory class. Students are doing an experiment about light. They have the equipment. They have instructions. They're following the procedure. But Feynman notices something. They're not observing. They're not thinking. They're not wondering. They're just following steps, like a recipe. Measure this. Record that. Calculate this. Write down the answer that matches the textbook. Rock share what he does. So Feynman asks one student, what do you see happening here? What's interesting about this? The student looks at him like he's crazy. I see the experiment working. The results match the theory. That's what's supposed to happen. But what's interesting? What surprises you? What makes you curious? Blank stare. Collart make the point devastating eye. These students aren't doing science. Science is about observing reality, asking questions, being surprised, wondering why, testing ideas. These students are performing rituals, following steps, getting the right answer. Not because they understand it, but because the textbook said that's what should happen. They're learning about science, learning the vocabulary of science, learning the appearance of science. But they're not actually doing science. They're not thinking scientifically. They're not developing scientific curiosity or reasoning. That's the third part of the lie, teaching about science instead of how to do science. Let's extra move to fourth discovery as in fourth. This is the most shocking one. Feynman discovers that everyone involved knows it's fake, but nobody admits it. He talks to the students privately, and they confess, "Of course, we don't really understand. We just memorize for the exams. That's how you pass." He talks to the professors, and some of them quietly admit, yes, the students don't really learn. But what can we do? This is how the system works. We have to cover the material. We have to give exams. We have to maintain standards. On to get intense offs, everyone knows. The students know they're not learning. The professors know they're not teaching. The administrators know the degrees don't mean much. But everyone keeps pretending because the alternative, admitting the whole system is broken, is too uncomfortable. So they maintain the theater. Students memorize, professors lecture, exams are passed, degrees are awarded. Everyone pretends education is happening. Pause or pause. That's the fourth part of the lie. Everyone participating in the pretense that memorization is learning. Fem bring it together, so that's what Feynman discovered in Brazil. An education system that teaches words instead of concepts, teaches definitions instead of understanding, teaches about science instead of how to do science, and maintains a collective pretense that this is real education. Direct address our now? Here's the uncomfortable question. Is this just a problem in Brazil in 1952? Or is this everywhere, right now? Hack answer, it's everywhere. Esser share modern examples. Students in American universities can recite the principles of evolution, but they can't explain why antibiotic resistance happens. They can define supply and demand, but they can't predict what happens to housing prices when interest rates change. They can recite the formulas for projectile motion, but they can't figure out the trajectory of a thrown ball. HR get directed, they know the words. They pass the tests, they get the degrees. But they don't understand, they can't apply. Think same lie, same theater, same pretense. Pause. And it's not just schools. It's online courses where students watch videos and think they've learned. It's books that teach terminology instead of concepts. It's the entire modern education system. The lie Feynman discovered in Brazil, it's still here. It's everywhere, and it's affecting you. Make it personally. Think about something you tried to learn recently, maybe from a course, maybe from a book, maybe from a video. Did you find yourself memorizing terms without really understanding them? Did you find yourself being able to repeat what you heard but not apply it? Did you find yourself knowing you were supposed to understand but not really getting it? That's the lie, right there, in your own experience. You've been taught words instead of concepts, definitions instead of understanding, about things instead of how to do things, and then you felt bad about yourself. I must not be smart enough. I must not be trying hard enough. Other people get this. Why don't I? Emphatica, it's not you, it's the lie, it's the system. It's how education is structured to maintain the appearance of learning without requiring actual understanding. Shift ton. So what did Feynman do about this? What was his solution? I share his approach. At the end of his time in Brazil, Feynman gives a speech to the professors and administrators, and he tells them everything he's discovered. Everything I just told you, and he offers a solution. A way to teach that actually produces understanding instead of just memorization. He says teach by connecting to reality, always. Every concept, every principle, every formula. Explain, don't start with the definition. Start with the phenomenon, the real thing, the experience. Don't teach the coefficient of kinetic friction is less than static friction. Start with pushing a heavy box. Notice how it's hard to start moving but easier to keep moving. Wonder why. Investigate, then introduce the concept. Don't teach Brewster's angle is start with sunlight reflecting off water. Notice how you see a bright reflection at certain angles. Wonder why. Investigate. Then introduce the concept to make the principle clear. Always connect to reality first. Then introduce the scientific concept as a way of understanding that reality. That way the concept has meaning. It's not just words. It's a tool for understanding something real, something you can see, something you can experience. Continue second principle. Demand explanation in simple terms. Always don't let students hide behind jargon. Don't let them recite textbook definitions. Make them explain concepts in their own words. To someone who knows nothing about the subject, if they can't do that, they don't understand. No matter how many tests they've passed. Third principle. Third, teach students to think, not to memorize. Give them problems they've never seen before. Problems that require applying concepts in new ways. Problems that require reasoning, not just remembering. If they can only solve problems they've seen before, they haven't learned to think. They've just learned to pattern match. A fourth principle. Fourth, make them actually do the thing. Don't just teach about science. Make them do science, observe, question, hypothesize, test, discover. Don't just teach about writing. Make them write. Badly at first, then better. Don't just teach about programming. Make them program, debug, figure things out. Make the point doing is learning. Watching someone else do is not learning. Reading about doing is not learning. Doing is learning. Those are Feynman's principles for real education. Education that produces understanding instead of just the appearance of understanding. Address the resistance. Now, when Feynman proposed this in Brazil, you know what happened. The education establishment pushed back hard. This is too slow. We have too much material to cover. This doesn't work for standardized testing. How do we measure learning? This puts too much pressure on students. They can't handle this level of thinking. This requires too much preparation from teachers. They're already overwhelmed. You can make the point. In other words, your method requires actual learning. Our system isn't set up for that. Our system is set up for the appearance of learning, and we're not going to change. The lie was more important than the truth. The system was more important than actual education, and nothing changed. To get direct tests, and that's still true today. The same lie, the same resistance to truth, the same prioritization of system over learning. But here's what's important: you don't need the system to change. You can change how you learn, right now. A present solution. If you're a student, stop trying to memorize. Start trying to understand. When you encounter a new concept, don't just memorize the definition. Ask, what real thing is this describing? How does this connect to my experience? Can I explain this to someone in simple terms? If you can't answer those questions, you don't understand yet. Don't move on. Stay with it until you do. Continue when you're studying. Don't just reread. Test yourself with new problems. Problems you haven't seen before. Can you apply the concept? Can you think with it? If not, you haven't learned it. No matter how many times you've reviewed your notes. Asian for teachers. If you're a teacher, start with reality. Always, don't begin a lesson with definitions. Begin with something students can see, experience, touch, wonder about. Then introduce the concept as a way of understanding that reality. Demand explanation in simple terms. Don't accept jargon. Don't accept recitation. Make students explain concepts in their own words. To you, to each other, to their grandmother. If they can't, they don't understand. Help them get there. A for parents. If you're a parent, don't be fooled by good grades. Your child can get straight A's and understand nothing. The system rewards memorization. It doesn't require understanding, so ask different questions. Don't ask, what did you learn? Ask, can you explain this to me in simple terms? Can you show me an example? Can you apply this to something in real life? If they can't, they memorized for the test and forgot everything. They participated in the lie. Help them learn for real instead. For self-learner says. And if you're teaching yourself something, be honest about what you understand. Don't fool yourself into thinking you've learned something just because you've read about it, or watched a video about it, or completed a course about it. Test yourself. Can you explain it simply? Can you apply it to new situations? Can you use it to solve problems you haven't seen before? Make it concrete. If you're learning programming, don't just follow tutorials. Build something without a tutorial. Break things. Fix them. Actually, program, if you're learning a language, don't just study grammar. Try to communicate. Make mistakes. Get corrected. Actually use the language. If you're learning anything, do the thing. Not about the thing itself. I share transformation story. Let me tell you about someone who applied this. Call her Sarah. Sarah was a biology major. Good grades. Graduated with honors. Couldn't get a job in her field because when employers interviewed her, they realized she didn't actually understand biology. She'd memorized it for tests, but she couldn't think with it, couldn't apply it, couldn't reason about it. She was devastated. 4 years of college. Good grades. And she hadn't actually learned anything. Then she discovered Feynman's story. And she understood it wasn't her fault. She'd been taught the lie. She'd been taught to memorize instead of understand. So she started over, relearning biology. But this time properly. Share method. She picked one concept at a time. Let's say a natural selection. Well, she didn't start with the textbook definition. She started with questions. Why do some species survive and others go extinct? Why do bacteria become resistant to antibiotics? Why do dogs look so different from their wolf ancestors? She investigated, read about real examples, studied actual cases, connected the concept to reality. Continued, then she explained it, in her own words, to friends who knew nothing about biology. If they didn't understand her explanation, she revised it, made it simpler, made it clearer. Then she applied it, found new situations where natural selection might be happening, made predictions, tested them. Share result one concept at a time. Understanding deeply instead of memorizing broadly. Connecting to reality, explaining simply. Applying actively. 6 months later, she got a job. Because in interviews, she could think. She could reason. She could apply concepts. She actually understood biology. Not because she was smarter, but because she learned properly instead of learning the lie. Arsech make the broader point. That's what happens when you reject the lie. When you demand real understanding instead of accepting the appearance of understanding. You learn less material, but you understand it deeply, and that deep understanding is worth more than broad memorization. Tell final story. Let me end by telling you what happened to Feynman after Brazil. He went back to the United States, back to teaching at Caltech, and he became legendary as a teacher. The Feynman lectures on physics are still studied today, decades after his death. Why? What made him such an effective teacher? Answer, because he never taught the lie. He always taught for understanding. He started with reality, always. Every concept connected to something you could see, experience, touch, wonder about. He demanded simple explanation. If you couldn't explain it to a child, you didn't understand it. He made students think. Not memorize, not recite. Think. He made them actually do physics. Not just watch him do physics. Not just read about physics. Do it. Azaman Pazay and his students. They didn't just pass tests. They became physicists. They understood deeply. They could think with the concepts. They could apply them to new problems. They actually learned. Walk to center. So here's what I want you to take from this. Here's what matters. The education system is lying to you. It's teaching you words instead of concepts, definitions instead of understanding, about things instead of how to do things. And it's maintaining a collective pretense that this is real education, a direct challenge. But you don't have to accept the lie. You can demand real understanding from yourself, from your teachers, from your education. You can refuse to memorize without understanding. You can refuse to recite without explaining. You can refuse to study about things without doing them. Vast, make it personal, high. Think about what you're trying to learn right now. Right now. Today, are you learning words or concepts? Definitions or understanding? About the thing or the thing itself? Pauses, be honest. If you're learning the lie, if you're memorizing without understanding, stop. Start over. Do it properly. Connect to reality. Explain simply. Think actively. Do the thing. It's slower. It feels less productive. It covers less material. But it produces actual learning, actual understanding, actual capability. A final statement, Feynman's shocking realization in that Brazilian classroom was this: most education is theater. It's performance. It's pretense. But learning doesn't have to be. You can learn for real. You can demand real understanding. You can reject the lie. Pause. And when you do, when you learn properly, deeply, truly, you'll discover something amazing. Learning isn't hard. It's natural. It's joyful. It's what your brain wants to do. It's only hard when you're trying to memorize instead of understand. When you're participating in the lie instead of seeking the truth. Smile, so stop participating in the lie. Start learning for real. That's what Feynman discovered. That's what he taught. That's what changed everything for him. And it can change everything for you too. Thank you. If you want to learn more about how Feynman actually taught, if you want to understand his methods for real education that produces real understanding, do me a favor, like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're exploring how to learn properly, not the lie, not the theater. Real understanding, real capability, real learning. Join us. Let's reject the lie together. See you in the next one.
People ask, how are magnets made? That sounds simple, but it isn't. Because the real mystery is not how we make magnets. The mystery is why matter agrees to behave this way at all. Take a piece of iron. It looks ordinary, quiet, dead, but inside it billions of electrons are moving, not randomly, not politely, spinning like tiny charged tops. Each one produces a magnetic effect. On their own, they cancel each other out. Chaos. No magnet. So here's the first rule you must understand. Nature prefers disorder. Random motion is the default. Alignment is rare. A magnet is not born when electrons exist. Electrons exist everywhere. A magnet is born when order defeats randomness. When we make a magnet, we don't inject magnetism into the material. That idea is childish. We force the internal spins to agree by stroking iron with a magnetic field, by placing it in a strong field, or by manufacturing alloys designed to resist chaos. We give electrons a reason, not a desire, to line up. And once they line up, something remarkable happens. The material begins to enforce that order on itself. That's the shocking part. The magnet is not held together by glue or force. It's held together by rules, invisible rules. You can break the magnet in half. Congratulations, you now have two magnets, not one magnet with a missing piece, two complete ones. Why? Because magnetism is not stored in an object like water in a bottle. It's a pattern. And patterns don't disappear when you cut them. They repeat. Heat the magnet enough and the order collapses. The electrons panic. Random motion wins. The magnet dies. Not because magnetism left, but because discipline did. So how are magnets made? They are made when matter is forced into obedience, when invisible motion is aligned, when chaos is briefly defeated. And that should bother you, because it means the world you see is not governed by what you touch, but by what you cannot see, cannot feel, and barely understand. A magnet doesn't prove human intelligence. It exposes its limits. We can make one, we can use one, but when we ask why nature allows this strange order to exist at all, we are still guessing, and that's the real lesson. Magnetism is not a thing, it's a consequence. That sentence should make you uncomfortable, because the moment you think magnetism is a thing, you stop thinking. You imagine it as a substance, a force stored inside objects, something you can pour in or take out. That picture is wrong, completely wrong, and nature punishes wrong pictures by confusing you later. Nothing in a magnet says, I am magnetism. There is no magnetic fluid, no hidden glue, no tiny North Pole particles marching in formation. What you see as magnetism is what happens when matter obeys certain rules. Rules it did not invent and cannot break. Inside every piece of iron are electrons. That much is ordinary, but electrons do something strange. They spin. Not like a spinning ball, don't imagine that, but in a way that produces a tiny magnetic effect. One electron is weak, meaningless. A billion of them, all pointing in random directions, still mean nothing. Chaos cancels itself. This is the first brutal fact. Nature defaults to disorder. If nothing interferes, the spins point everywhere. The material is not a magnet. It never will be. Not because magnetism is missing, but because order is missing. So when we say making a magnet, we are already lying. We are not creating anything new. We are not adding magnetism. We are forcing agreement. We are bullying nature into alignment. Apply an external magnetic field, and suddenly electrons face a choice they didn't have before. Align and lower the energy, or resist and lose. Many resist, some align. But when enough align, something remarkable happens. The aligned electrons make it easier for others to align. Order feeds on itself. That's not magic. That's consequence. The material doesn't want to be magnetic. Desire has nothing to do with physics. The system simply discovers that one configuration costs less energy than another. Nature is cheap. It always chooses the cheapest option available. And once that alignment stabilizes, The object behaves in a way that shocks beginners. It attracts iron, deflects compasses, resists being erased. Not because it stores magnetism, but because it maintains a pattern. Break the magnet in half. You expect one north and one south, right? Wrong. You get two magnets. Break them again. Still magnets, over and over. Because you never destroyed magnetism. You only copied the pattern into smaller regions. That should scare you a little, because it means what you experience as a force acting across empty space is really the visible shadow of invisible motion. You'd never touch magnetism. You only witness its consequences. Heat the magnet and watch what happens. As temperature rises, electrons vibrate more violently. Random motion increases. Alignment weakens. At a certain point, the pattern collapses completely. The magnet disappears. Where did the magnetism go? Nowhere. It never went anywhere because it was never a thing. The order died, and with it the behavior you named magnetism. This is where most explanations fail. They stop at because electrons align and call it understanding. That's lazy. The deeper question is, why does alignment of microscopic spins affect objects centimeters away? Why does nature allow local order to create distant effects? That question has no comfortable answer. We can calculate the fields. We can predict the forces. We can build machines that depend on them. But the underlying rule, the reason the universe is built this way instead of another, remains untouched. And that's the point. Magnetism humiliates arrogance. It reminds you that knowing equations is not the same as knowing why the world obeys them. You can describe the consequence perfectly and still not understand the causes. So stop asking how magnets are made as if they are manufactured like chairs or engines. Ask instead what kind of universe permits invisible motion to produce visible certainty. Ask why order, once established, can dominate space around it. Ask why nature allows patterns to act like power. Because magnetism is not a thing you hold in your hand. It is evidence that reality is governed not by objects, but by relationships, not by substances, but by rules. N. Not by what you see, but by what you never will. And if that doesn't make you pause, then you weren't really listening. Order is rare in nature. Magnets are organized rebellion. If you think nature likes order, you've been fooled by your own expectations. The universe does not wake up every morning trying to be neat. Left alone, things spread out, mix, decay, and fall apart. Heat flows from hot to cold. Structures collapse. Motion becomes noise. Disorder is not an accident. It is the default. This is not philosophy. It is physics. Every system, if given time and freedom, moves toward randomness. That tendency has a name, but names are cheap. What matters is the rule: order costs energy. Maintaining it requires resistance. And resistance is rare. Now look at a magnet. It doesn't look rebellious. It sits quietly on a table, pulling paper clips like a well-behaved object. But inside, something unnatural is happening. Something that should not persist. Inside the material, countless electrons are in motion, each with a tiny magnetic influence. If nature had its way, and most of the time it does, those influences would point in all directions. They would cancel out. Nothing special would happen. No magnet, no force, just noise. That is the normal state. A magnet exists only because that normal state has been violated. When electrons line up, they are not following chaos, they are defying it. They are acting collectively, maintaining a pattern in a universe that constantly tries to erase patterns. That is why magnetism feels mysterious. It is not just a force, it is sustained disobedience. This alignment doesn't happen because electrons are cooperative or intelligent. Forget that idea. Nature does not negotiate. The alignment happens because, under certain conditions, order becomes cheaper than disorder. The system finds a loophole in chaos, and when it does, it locks in. Once enough spins align, they create an environment where staying aligned is easier than breaking formation. The material becomes self-enforcing. The rebellion organizes itself. What began as a fragile pattern becomes stubborn, resistant, difficult to destroy. That's why magnets are hard to erase. You can shake them, drop them, insult them, nothing happens. But heat them, and suddenly the rebellion collapses. Random motion overwhelms alignment. The electrons stop agreeing. The order dissolves. The magnet dies, not violently, quietly, without drama, because chaos doesn't fight, it waits. This is the lesson people miss. Order is always temporary, even in magnets, especially in magnets. And yet, for a time, that order does something astonishing. It reaches beyond itself. It affects other objects. It exerts influence across empty space. A local act of organization creates distant consequences. That should disturb you, because it means the universe allows small pockets of order to punch above their weight. It allows structure to project power. It allows patterns to act like forces. Magnets don't overpower nature, they exploit it. They use the rules of motion, energy, and interaction in a way that looks like defiance but is actually precision. They are not violations of the universe, they are proofs of how subtle the universe is. Break a magnet in half and the order does not disappear. It reorganizes. You don't get a broken rebellion. You get two smaller ones. The pattern survives division. That's not a property of objects. It's a property of systems. And this is where your intuition fails. You want magnetism to be stored somewhere. You want order to be contained. But order is not a substance. It is a relationship between parts. As long as those relationships can reform, the rebellion continues. Magnets teach a brutal truth. Stability is not about strength. It's about cooperation under constraint. The electrons are not strong individually. Together, aligned, they produce something that reshapes behavior at a distance. The universe does not reward force. It rewards coordination. And that is why order is rare. Not because it is impossible, but because it is expensive. It must constantly defend itself against noise, heat, vibration, and time. Most systems surrender quickly. Magnets resist longer than most. So when you hold a magnet, don't admire the force, admire the discipline. Admire the fact that in a universe addicted to disorder, a small piece of matter learned how to stand in formation. Not forever, not perfectly. Be UT long enough to matter. That is organized rebellion, and it never lasts, which is exactly why it's worth understanding you. Never create magnetism, you only unlock it. That sentence destroys a comforting illusion, the illusion that humans are inventors of forces, that we manufacture magnetism the way we manufacture machines. We don't. We never did, and we never will. When you make a magnet, nothing new enters the material. No substance arrives. No force is injected. Nothing is added. If that bothers you, good. It means you're paying attention. Every piece of iron already contains everything required to behave like a magnet. The electrons are there, the spins are there, the magnetic effects are there, hidden, neutralized, canceling one another out in silence. Magnetism is present long before you notice it. The only thing missing is permission. Inside ordinary matter, each electron contributes a tiny magnetic influence. On its own, it's insignificant. Even in large numbers, those influences usually point in random directions. Nature does this automatically. Randomness is cheaper. It requires no maintenance. Disorder is the default state. So the material appears non-magnetic. Not because magnetism is absent, but because it is locked. Locked by chaos. When we say we create a magnet, what we actually do is remove the lock. We change the conditions so alignment becomes possible. We expose the system to a strong magnetic field or manufacture it in a way that favors alignment or carefully cool it while imposing order. In every case, we are not creators, we are key holders. The electrons respond not to intention, but to energy economics. Aligning their spins lowers the system's energy under certain conditions. Nature does not ask why. It follows the cheapest path available. Once alignment begins, it becomes contagious. Aligned regions encourage neighboring regions to align. What was once buried becomes self-sustaining. The magnet appears, but nothing appeared. The behavior changed. This distinction matters more than you think, because if magnetism were something you created, you could destroy it completely, erase it, remove it. But you can't. You can only disrupt the order that reveals it. Heat the magnet, and the electrons vibrate violently. Their spins lose discipline. Random motion overwhelms alignment. The magnet vanishes. Where did the magnetism go? Nowhere. It didn't leave. It didn't leak out. It didn't evaporate. The lock closed again. This is why magnets are humbling. They refuse to give you ownership. You can influence them, shape them, use them, but you cannot claim authorship over the force itself. The universe supplied that long before you arrived. Break a magnet in half and watch what happens. You don't get a north without a south. You don't get a dead piece and a live piece. You get two complete magnets. The unlocked pattern simply reestablishes itself locally. That's not manufacturing, that's Reveilla. We tend to confuse control with creation. If we can turn something on and off, we assume we made it. But flipping a switch doesn't create electricity. It allows electricity to flow. Magnetism works the same way. And this misunderstanding spreads everywhere. People talk about generating forces, inventing power, creating energy, as if the universe were a warehouse waiting for human approval. It isn't. It's a rule book. You either play by it or nothing happens. Magnets remind you of your actual position. You are not a force maker. You are a condition setter. When the conditions are right, nature reveals its hidden behaviors. When they are wrong, it hides them again. The behaviors were never yours to begin with. This realization should make you more careful, not less impressed. It means the universe is richer than your actions. It means reality contains possibilities that remain dormant until the correct constraints awaken them. Magnetism is one of those possibilities not created, not owned, not manufactured, unlocked. And once you understand that, you stop asking shallow questions like, how do we make magnets? And start asking the dangerous ones. What else is locked inside matter? What other behaviors are waiting for the right conditions? How much of reality is invisible, not because it's weak, but because it's disciplined into silence? Magnets don't answer those questions. They warn you. They tell you that the world is not built from what you add to it, but from what you allow to align, and that should permanently change how you think about power. A magnet is proof that invisible rules dominate the visible world. Look at a magnet and you see almost nothing. A dull piece of metal, no motion, no glow, no sign of power. And yet it reaches across empty space and commands other objects to move, not by contact, not by persuasion, by obedience. That alone should make you suspicious of your senses, because everything you think matters, shape, color, texture, weight, is irrelevant here. The magnet doesn't look powerful. It behaves powerful, and behavior always reveals more truth than appearance. What you are witnessing is not a force stored inside an object. You are witnessing the enforcement of rules you cannot see, rules that operate whether you understand them or not, rules that do not announce themselves. The visible world is obedient to an invisible framework inside the magnet. Electrons are in motion. Their spins are aligned, forming an organized pattern. You don't see that, you never will. But that microscopic discipline reshapes macroscopic reality. Paper clips move, compasses turn, motors spin. Entire technologies depend on it. You never touch the rule, you only touch the result. And that's the trap of everyday experience. We believe what we can see, we trust what we can feel, but magnets don't care about your trust. They work anyway. They operate with perfect indifference to human intuition. You can place a magnet near iron and watch attraction happen, but you will never see the cause travel through space. There is no visible rope, no pushing hand, just motion triggered by nothing you can point to. This makes people uncomfortable, so they invent mental shortcuts. They imagine fields as substances, lines in space, something flowing, something tangible, but those pictures are not reality. They are coping mechanisms. A field is not a thing. It is a rule expressed everywhere at once. That rule tells charged particles how to behave if they find themselves in a certain position. It doesn't move objects directly. It defines permission, and matter follows permission without protests. This is why breaking a magnet in half doesn't destroy it. The rule doesn't live in one place. It reasserts itself wherever the conditions allow. Cut the object, and the invisible order simply redraws itself. Two magnets appear because the rules remain intact. Heat the magnet and watch its power fade. Not because the rule vanished, but because disorder disrupted the system's ability to obey it. The law didn't change. The material's compliance did. Distinction matters. The universe does not renegotiate its rules. It does not adapt to your experiments. It does not care if you find it strange. Matter either follows the rules or fails to produce the behavior you expect. Magnets expose this mercilessly. They show you that the real machinery of reality is not made of gears and surfaces, but of constraints and allowances, of interactions defined long before objects exist, of mathematics masquerading as force. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. Gravity works the same way. So does electricity. So does light. Nothing you rely on daily is truly visible. You live inside consequences, not causes. The visible world is the surface foam of deeper structure. This is why understanding magnetism doesn't make the world simpler. It makes it more unsettling. You realize that what you call solid is mostly empty space. That what you call force is instruction. That what you call control is alignment with rules you didn't write. A magnet is small, but it's an honest teacher. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't explain itself. It just works. And in doing so, it tells you something brutal. Reality is not obligated to match your intuition. It operates according to invisible logic, and your senses are merely allowed to observe the aftermath. So the next time you watch a magnet pull iron from a distance, don't ask what the magnet is doing. Ask what rules you are witnessing. Because the visible world is not in charge. It never was. and the magnet is the proof sitting quietly in your hand. Understanding magnetism humbles intelligence, not because it is complicated, but because it refuses to flatter you. At first glance, magnetism looks simple. Opposites attract, like poles repel. Draw a few lines, memorize a few rules, solve a few problems, and you feel clever. That confidence is a trap. Magnetism lets you feel smart just long enough to expose how shallow your understanding really is. You can describe what happens with precision. You can predict outcomes with equations. You can build machines that rely on it. And still, you don't know why reality behaves this way instead of some other way. That gap is where intelligence gets humbled. When you study magnetism seriously, the first thing you learn is not power, it's limitation. You realize that the words you use are placeholders: field, force, interaction. These are not explanations. They are labels pinned onto behavior you cannot directly observe. You never see magnetism. You never touch it. You never isolate it. You only see matter responding to invisible rules. That should unsettle anyone who believes intelligence is about mastery, because magnetism does not submit to understanding the way mechanical systems do. You can open a clock and see how it works. You can't open a magnet and point to the place where magnetism lives. There is no such place. Inside the magnet are electrons, spins, alignments, and even there, certainty dissolves. Try to explain why electron spin exists at all, and language collapses. It is not rotation. It is not motion in space. It is an intrinsic property with no classical picture. Already, intuition has failed. Then you learn something worse. Magnetism is not even a standalone phenomenon. It is inseparable from electricity. Two faces of a deeper structure. Change your frame of reference and one becomes the other. What looked like a magnetic effect was electric all along, or vice versa. Your neat categories fall apart. And if you keep going, magnetism stops being about magnets entirely. It becomes about symmetry, conservation laws, and abstract mathematical relationships that do not resemble the physical world at all. The equations work flawlessly, while your understanding lags behind, dragging metaphors that no longer apply. This is where intelligence meets its boundary, because intelligence loves explanation that feels complete. Magnetism offers none. It offers accuracy without comfort. It allows prediction without comprehension. You can calculate the field around a wire without knowing what a field is. You can design a motor without knowing why nature honors these equations. You can pass exams without ever touching the core mystery. Magnetism lets you succeed while remaining ignorant, and that is its quiet cruelty. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that understanding magnetism does not elevate you above nature. It pushes you lower. It forces you to admit that reality is not constructed from common sense, but from structures that tolerate no mental shortcuts, every attempt to visualize. Magnetism eventually breaks. Field lines are not real. They don't exist in space. They are bookkeeping tools, helpful lies. And yet, without those lies, we are lost. So intelligence adapts. It becomes humbler. It learns to operate without pictures. It accepts that explanation can be operational rather than intuitive, that knowing how to calculate is not the same as knowing what is happening. Magnets don't care if you understand them. They don't reward insight. They obey the rules regardless. And that is the final insult to ego, because intelligence wants to be central. Magnetism proves it is peripheral. The universe does not wait for your comprehension. It behaves first. You explain later, poorly, approximately, and always incomplete. So when someone claims they understand magnetism, what they usually mean is that they can work with it. That's not the same thing. The real understanding is realizing how much remains opaque. Magnetism teaches restraint. It teaches you that intelligence is not dominance over nature. It is negotiation with mystery, that the smartest position is not certainty, but respect for the depth of what you cannot reduce. And once you accept that, something important happens. You stop demanding that reality make sense to you. You start learning how to listen.
Shapeless, overwhelming, all-consuming. You can't see it clearly, can't define it, can't measure it. It's just this massive, terrible thing that paralyzes you. Far hold up the clean paper with neat writing. This is the same fear after logic touches it. Defined, measured, analyzed. And suddenly it's not paralyzing anymore. It's just information. Data, something you can work with instead of something that controls you. Pride put both papers down. Richard Feynman discovered something profound. Fear isn't eliminated by courage. It's not overcome by willpower. It's not conquered by positive thinking. Fear is eliminated by logic, by clear thinking, by examining what you're actually afraid of and discovering that most of it disappears under rational scrutiny. Fact direct addressa. Right now, you're carrying fears, big ones, small ones, fears about your career, your relationships, your future, your capabilities. And those fears are controlling you, limiting you, making decisions for you, not because the fears are justified, but because you've never applied logic to them. You've never examined them rationally. You've never actually looked at what you're afraid of and asked, is this fear based on reality, or is this fear based on stories I'm telling myself? Leon Invis, today I'm going to show you Feynman's method, how he used logic to eliminate fear. Not suppress it, not ignore it, not push through it, eliminate it, dissolve it, make it disappear by examining it clearly. And I'm going to teach you how to do the same, how to take your fears, those shapeless, overwhelming things, and reduce them to information you can work with instead of emotions that paralyze you, that walk across stage. Let me start with a story that reveals this method perfectly. It's the mid-1960s. Feynman is invited to join the Rogers Commission, the commission investigating the Challenger space shuttle disaster. 7 astronauts dead, national tragedy, enormous political pressure, high stakes. And the commission is filled with powerful people, famous people, former generals, cabinet members, Neil Armstrong, people with authority, people with reputations to protect. Build the pressure, and there's Feynman, a physicist, no political experience, no diplomatic training, and he starts to uncover something. NASA is lying, or at least being dishonest, covering up the real causes of the disaster. Everyone tells him, don't make waves, don't embarrass NASA, don't challenge the official narrative. You'll make enemies, you'll hurt your reputation, you'll face consequences. Present the fear of fears. This is a fear most people would feel intensely. Fear of powerful opposition, fear of consequences, fear of being attacked, fear of ruining relationships, fear of professional damage. Most people faced with this fear would back down, would stay quiet, would go along. The fear would control their behavior. I'll show what Feynman did but Feynman didn't feel that fear, or rather, he felt the initial emotion, but he applied logic to it, and the fear dissolved. Here's how he thought about it. Avar share his logics. What am I actually afraid of? That powerful people will be angry with me. Okay, what's the worst that happens if powerful people are angry with me? They might criticize me publicly. They might try to damage my reputation. They might make my life more difficult professionally. But will any of that stop me from doing physics? Will it prevent me from thinking? Will it take away my ability to work on problems I care about? No. The worst they can do is make noise. And noise doesn't actually harm me. So what am I really afraid of? Nothing that matters. Make the point, Sass, that's logic eliminating fear. Not by denying the emotion, but by examining the actual consequences. By asking, what's the worst that happens? And is that actually bad? And when he looked at it logically, the fear disappeared, because the worst case scenario wasn't actually that bad. Hatcher continued the story, so he went public with his findings, did his famous O-ring demonstration on live television, showed that NASA's safety calculations were nonsense, embarrassed powerful people, made enemies. And you know what happened? Nothing terrible. Some people were angry, some criticized him, some stopped talking to him. But he kept doing physics, kept thinking, kept working on what mattered to him. The consequences his fear predicted never materialized. Or when they did, they were trivial. I first reveal the principle. That's the first principle of using logic to eliminate fear. Examine the actual worst case scenario. Most of the time, it's not that bad. And when you see that clearly, the fear dissolves. Present the framework. Let me give you Feynman's complete framework. The logical process for eliminating fear, the specific steps that turn shapeless terror into manageable information. Step 1. Name the fear precisely. Fear stays powerful when it's vague, when it's just this shapeless sense of dread, when you can't articulate what you're actually afraid of. So force yourself to name it precisely. Specifically, what exactly are you afraid of? That afraid, make it concrete. A note. I'm afraid of giving this presentation. But I'm afraid that during this presentation, I'll forget what I was going to say, and people will think I'm incompetent, and that will damage my professional reputation. See the difference. The second is specific, defined, examinable. You can apply logic to it. Give Feynman an example. Feynman did this constantly. When he felt fear, he'd stop and ask, what exactly am I afraid of? Not generally. Specifically, what precise outcome am I fearing? Naming it precisely was the first step to dismantling it. Step two. Step two. Separate the fear from the facts. Fear comes with a story, a narrative about what will happen and why it will be terrible. But that story contains assumptions, interpretations, predictions that might not be accurate. So separate the fear from the facts. What do you actually know? What are you assuming? What's interpretation versus what's reality? I can make it concrete. Fear says, if I start this business, I'll fail, lose all my money, and end up destitute. Facts are, starting a business involves risk. Some businesses fail. I would need to invest money. We'll see the separation. The fear contains predictions and interpretations that go beyond facts. Separate them. Give the analysis of facts. Some businesses fail. That's true. Risk exists. That's true. Fear's additions. I will fail. I will lose all my money. I will end up destitute. Are those facts? No. Those are predictions. Interpretations. Stories added to the facts. Not necessarily true. Explain why this matters. When you separate fear from facts, you see how much of your fear is story, not reality, and stories can be examined, challenged, revised. Step 3 and a step 3. Calculate the actual probability. Fear makes unlikely things feel certain. It makes rare outcomes feel inevitable. It distorts probability. So calculate the actual probability, not how it feels. What's the real likelihood? Make it concrete. Fear says, if I speak up in this meeting, everyone will think I'm stupid. Calculate the probability. How often does speaking up in meetings actually result in everyone thinking the speaker is stupid? In my experience, based on what I've observed, what's the actual probability? Continue, maybe 5%, maybe less. Most of the time when people speak up, others either agree, disagree, or don't care much. Everyone thinking you're stupid is a rare outcome, but fear makes it feel inevitable. Because of Feynman's approaches, Feynman was always calculating probabilities. What's the actual likelihood of this feared outcome? Not what it feels like, what the data suggests. And most of the time, the feared outcome was highly unlikely. The fear was based on exaggerated probability estimates. Step 4, examine the actual worst-case scenario. Okay, let's say the feared outcome happens. What then? What's the actual consequence? Is it actually as terrible as the fear suggests? Let's make it concrete. Fear says, if I quit my job to pursue what I actually care about, it will be a disaster. Worst case, I quit my job. I try something new. It doesn't work out. I need to get another job. Is that actually a disaster? Or is it just an outcome you can navigate? Probably the latter. Give Feynman an example. Feynman examined worst cases constantly. If this feared thing happens, what actually occurs? Can I handle it? Is it truly catastrophic or just uncomfortable? Most of the time, just uncomfortable. Not catastrophic, survivable, navigable. Errors make the point. When you examine the worst case clearly, most fears dissolve. Because the worst case is almost never as bad as the shapeless fear suggests. Step 5, identify what you can control. Fear focuses on outcomes you can't control. That's part of what makes it paralyzing. You're afraid of things you have no power over. So identify what you actually can control. Where does your agency lie? What actions can you take? Make it concrete. Fear. What if people don't like my work? What you can control, the quality of the work, the effort you put in, how you present it, how you improve based on feedback. What you can't control, whether people like it. Explain the shifty. When you focus on what you can control, fear diminishes. Because you're no longer helplessly waiting for outcomes. You're actively working on inputs you control. Excerpt Feynman example. Feynman never feared outcomes he couldn't control. He focused entirely on what he could do. The quality of his thinking, the clarity of his explanations, the rigor of his work. Results, other people's opinions, recognition, all outside his control, so he didn't fear them. Bring together the steps of, so those are the 5 steps. 1, name the fear precisely. 2, separate fear from facts. 3, calculate actual probability. 4, examine the worst case scenario. 5, identify what you can control. Make the promise, apply these 5 steps to any fear, and it transforms from shapeless terror to manageable information, from paralyzing emotion to actionable data. Tell transformation story. Let me tell you about someone who used this method. Call him James. James was terrified of public speaking, not just nervous, Terrified, panic attack level fear. It was limiting his career, preventing opportunities, controlling his choices. And the fear was this vague, overwhelming thing. I can't speak in public. It's too scary. I'll freeze. It will be terrible. Fact the intervention. Then he learned Feynman's method, and he applied the 5 steps to his fear. Step by step. Step 1, name it precisely. I'm afraid that if I speak in public, I'll freeze up, forget what I wanted to say, look incompetent, and people will lose respect for me. Much more specific than, I'm afraid of public speaking. Now he had something to examine. Continue either. Step 2. Separate fear from facts. Facts. I will be speaking in front of people. I might feel nervous. Nerves sometimes affect performance. A fear's addition Z. I will freeze. I will definitely forget. People will definitely lose respect. Those are predictions, not facts. Asite continue. Step 3. Calculate probability. How often do people actually freeze and forget everything in presentations? Based on what I've seen, maybe 5% of the time. And even then, do people usually lose all respect? No, they're usually sympathetic. The feared outcome was unlikely. The fear had made it feel certain. Continue. Step 4. Worst case. Okay, worst case, I do freeze, I do forget. Some people think less of me. Is that catastrophic? No, it's uncomfortable. Embarrassing, maybe, but survivable. Life continues. I recover. Not a disaster, just an uncomfortable outcome. Continue. Step 5. What can I control? I can control how well I prepare, how much I practice, how I manage my nerves, how I respond if I do forget. I can't control whether people judge me, whether I feel nervous, whether everything goes perfectly. Focus on the first list, let go of the second. Let the result armed with this logical analysis. James prepared and gave his presentation. He was nervous, but not paralyzed. The fear had transformed from overwhelming terror to manageable discomfort. He didn't freeze. He didn't forget. And even if he had, he knew it wouldn't be catastrophic. The transformation, 6 months later, he was regularly presenting. Not fearlessly, he still felt nerves, but the paralyzing fear was gone. Logic had dissolved it. They make the universal point as that's available to you. Every fear you carry, every paralyzing terror, it can be examined logically, dismantled, reduced to manageable information. Address deeper fears. Now let me show you how this applies to deeper fears. Not just fear of presentations or starting businesses, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of inadequacy, the big ones. Fear of failure, if fear of failure is particularly common and particularly paralyzing. What if I try and fail? What if it doesn't work out? Apply logic. Evaluate, name it P. Precisely. I'm afraid that if I try this and fail, I'll have wasted time and effort, and I'll feel like I'm not capable. Act separate from facts. Facts, if I try something, there's a chance it won't work. That's true of all attempts, of fear's additions. It will definitely be a waste. I'll definitely feel incapable. Failure will prove I can't do things. Calculate probability. What's the probability that trying and not succeeding is a complete waste? Actually pretty low. Most failures teach something. Most attempts, even unsuccessful ones, build skills. And what's the probability that one failure proves permanent incapability? Essentially 0. Everyone capable has failed multiple times. Our worst case, I try. It doesn't work out. I learn what not to do. I try something else. Is that catastrophic? No, that's just learning. That's how capability develops. What you control. I control whether I try, how much effort I put in, what I learn from the attempt, what I try next. I don't control whether this specific attempt succeeds. Act the dissolution, see how the fear dissolves. When you examine failure logically, it stops being this terrible thing and becomes just information, feedback, part of the process. Give Feynman's relationship with failure. Feynman failed constantly, tried approaches that didn't work, pursued ideas that went nowhere, made mistakes regularly, but he never feared failure because he'd applied logic to it. He understood that failure was just data, information about what doesn't work, not a referendum on his capability. Fear of judgment. Another big one, fear of judgment. What will people think? Apply logic fast and name it peaks. I'm afraid that if I do this thing I care about, people will judge me negatively, and that judgment will hurt me somehow. Separate from facts of facts. Some people might not like what I do. Some might criticize. Some might think less of me. Fear's additions. Everyone will judge me. The judgment will be severe. It will actually harm me. Let's calculate probability. What's the probability everyone will judge me? Low? Some will like it, some won't care. Some will judge negatively. What's the probability negative judgment actually harms me? Depends on what harm means. If harm means I feel bad about criticism, that's internal, not external harm. If harm means real consequences, what's the probability? Usually very low. Has worst case, some people judge me negatively. Some criticize, some think less of me. What actually happens then? Do I lose my job? Probably not. Do I lose real friends? Probably not. Real friends don't abandon you over judgment. Do I suffer material consequences? Rarely. Mostly, I feel bad about being judged, which is uncomfortable but not catastrophic. What you control? I control whether I do the thing I care about, how I respond to judgment, whether I let it affect my self-perception. I don't control what people think, whether they judge, whether they approve. The dissolution. The fear of judgment dissolves when you realize most judgment doesn't actually harm you. It's just noise. Uncomfortable noise sometimes, but not real damage. Give Feynman example. Feynman was judged constantly. Too casual, too disrespectful, too unconventional, too irreverent. Did he care? No, because he'd examined the judgment logically. It didn't actually harm him. It didn't prevent him from doing physics. It didn't take away what mattered. So he ignored it. The fear didn't exist because the logic showed the judgment was harmless. A fear of inadequacy, one more fear of inadequacy. What if I'm not good enough? This is insidious. It stops people from trying, from attempting, from pushing their limits. Apply logic, or name it. I'm afraid that if I attempt this challenging thing, I'll discover I'm not capable enough, and that will prove I'm inadequate. If separate from facts of facts. This thing is challenging. I might struggle with it. I might not succeed immediately. A fear's additions, struggling proves inadequacy. Not succeeding immediately proves I'm not good enough. Being challenged means I shouldn't be attempting this. What's calculate probability? What's the probability that struggling with something challenging proves inadequacy? 0. Everyone struggles with challenges. That's why they're challenges. What's the probability that not succeeding immediately proves permanent inadequacy? Also 0. Capability develops through struggling with challenges. Worst case. I attempt this challenging thing and discover it's harder than I thought. I need more time, more practice, more learning than I expected. Is that catastrophic? No. That's just accurate assessment of where I am and what I need to develop. What you control, I control whether I attempt the challenge. How much effort I put in. Whether I persist when it's difficult. What I learn from struggling. I don't control whether I'm immediately successful. How hard it is. Whether it takes longer than expected. The dissolution of the fear of inadequacy dissolves when you realize not being immediately successful at something challenging doesn't prove inadequacy. It just proves it's challenging. And challenging things are how you develop capacity. Give Feynman example. Feynman tackled things he wasn't immediately good at. Biology, art, music, computing. He struggled with all of them initially. Did that prove inadequacy? No. It proved they were new and challenging, and he got better through persistent effort. He never feared inadequacy because he understood logically. Struggling with new things is how you become adequate at them. Let's address the emotional component. Now, some of you are thinking, but fear isn't just logical. It's emotional. You can't logic away emotions. You're right, and that's not what this method does. Feynman explained the relationship. This method doesn't eliminate the emotion. It eliminates the fear's power over you. You might still feel nervousness, anxiety, discomfort. Those are emotional responses. They're automatic. They're not controlled by logic. Guys, make the distinctions, but paralyzing fear that stops you from acting. That's different. That's fear combined with beliefs. Fear plus stories about what will happen and why it will be terrible. And those stories, those beliefs, those predictions, those can be examined logically, dismantled, revised. Share the result of when you apply logic, the emotion doesn't necessarily disappear, but it stops controlling you. You feel nervous, but you act anyway, because you've examined the fear logically and determined it's not justified. Give Feynman example. Feynman felt nerves sometimes, felt anxiety, felt discomfort. He was human. But those feelings didn't control him because he'd examined them logically. He understood they were just feelings, not accurate predictions of catastrophe. So he felt them and acted anyway. Accent present the practice. So how do you develop this skill? How do you train yourself to apply logic to fear? Practice. Deliberately, regularly. Give the exercise every time you feel fear, pause. Don't just react. Don't just avoid. Don't just push through with willpower. Apply the 5 steps, name it precisely, separate fear from facts. Calculate actual probability. Examine worst case, identify what you control, make it a habit, do this every time, make it a habit, a reflex. When fear arises, logic engages automatically. At first, it will be effortful. You'll have to consciously work through the steps. But over time, it becomes automatic. Your brain learns to apply logic to fear without conscious effort. Share the progression. Week 1, it takes 10 minutes to work through the steps. The fear still feels strong. Week 4, it takes 2 minutes. The fear diminishes faster. Week 12, it's almost automatic. Fear arises, logic engages. Fear dissolves within seconds. Actually, make the promise, that's achievable. That's trainable. That's how you develop Feynman's relationship with fear. Well, there's our final story. Let me end with one more Feynman story. Late in his life, he's diagnosed with cancer. Terminal. He knows he's dying. Knows he has limited time. Someone asks him, "Are you afraid?" His response, "Afraid?" And Feynman says, "Afraid of what? Dying? Why would I fear dying? What's the worst that happens? I stop existing. I won't be around to experience it. I won't suffer the state of being dead because I won't exist to experience anything. And before I die, I can still think, still work on problems, still be curious, still live. So what's to fear?" Posat's logic eliminating fear at the deepest level. Fear of death, supposedly the ultimate fear, dismantled through rational examination. A walk to center of fear isn't eliminated by courage, by willpower, by positive thinking. Fear is eliminated by logic, by examining what you're actually afraid of and discovering it's not as bad as the shapeless terror suggests. Direct statement, you carry fears. Right now, today, fears controlling your choices, limiting your actions, preventing you from attempting what matters. That's the invitation, but those fears can be examined, dismantled, reduced to manageable information through logical analysis. If our final challenge is, so take one fear right now, one thing you've been avoiding because of fear. Apply the 5 steps, name it precisely. What exactly are you afraid of? Separate fear from facts. What do you actually know versus what you're assuming? Calculate probability. What's the real likelihood of the feared outcome? Examine worst case. If it happens, is it actually catastrophic? Identify what you control. Where does your agency lie? Make the prediction, do this, and watch the fear transform from paralyzing terror to manageable information, from controller of your behavior to data you can work with. Final statement. That's how geniuses eliminate fear using logic. That's Feynman's method. Not by being fearless, but by examining fear rationally and discovering most of it dissolves under scrutiny. Smileless, use it, master it, free yourself. Thank you.
on.
If you want to understand more about Feynman's approach to clear thinking, how he used logic not just for fear but for every aspect of life, do me a favor. Like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're exploring how to think clearly, how to use logic to navigate challenges, how to live rationally. Join us. Let's eliminate fear together. See you in the next one.